So much to say and so little time to say it. The last time I spoke at one of our gatherings, Jim, who I think was probably the master ceremonies, literally had to take the hook and get me from the... But there is so much going on at the university today. Almost every week there is something major happening, some of it bad, some of it good. I think most important events that have happened recently has been at special Board of Visitors meetings where the board has reasserted its governance rights. I mean, for the past 15 years, I can say pretty surely the board had done nothing material regarding the administration at the university. They basically were there as an ultimate and total rubber stamp, went to a lot of football games, had a lot of meals, sat through a lot of self-congratulatory dog and pony shows put on by the administration, but had not governed. And the board today has reasserted its authority to govern, and none too soon. The last two presidents in particular ruled as by fiat and basically ruled without anyone considering or putting any type of controls on what they were doing. There's a lot I want to say about things I mentioned before, the double standards, the politicization, but the politicization is the key to it all. For those of you who have followed what's gone on at UVA for the past 15 years or so, and it's come under the guise and the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the acronym DEI, which really is unfair to use those terms because the way they've been applied on most college campuses really have nothing to do with important diversity or equity, and certainly not inclusion. And I'll mention it. DEI, as it has been applied at UVA and many other institutions, means only diversity as regards race, religion, ethnicity, gender. It doesn't have to do with the most important diversity on a college campus, which is diversity of thought. And in fact, this issue has been brought up many times, it's been discussed many times, has not in any shape or form taken hold at the University of Virginia. The faculty, we don't have specific numbers, but probably is somewhere between 95% left-leaning. The student government is run by left-leaning groups of students. And there's been no attempt to have what is so important at a university, at our university particularly, given our tradition and our history, a neutral playing and level playing field for the free exchange of competing ideas. That does not exist at UVA. Different views are not tolerated. There once was an atmosphere of mutual respect. That really doesn't exist anymore. And I think as the former dean of Yale Law School, Anthony Kronman, noted in his brilliant article entitled The Downsides of Diversity, what diversity is as it's, or DEI as it is, that's been applied on college campuses, is a political and social agenda masquerading as an academic ideal. And in fact, if you have a bunch of faculty and students that may look different, born in different places, of different backgrounds, but all think the same, do you have diversity? Or rather, do you have an echo chamber? And what we've had at UVA for the past 15 years has been an echo chamber. But at UVA, DEI has become worse. It's become a quasi-religion. It's become a catechism that, if not dutifully followed, results both figuratively and literally in having your knuckles rapped. You can see it everywhere. I've had hundreds of discussions with faculty, with students, with parents, with alumni who talk about being afraid to express their opinions. It's shocking and it's heartbreaking at Mr. Jefferson's University. And DI is bad enough as a concept, but in the hands of an administration like the one we have now, it has become the proverbial poison tree that has spread its fruit in so many different ways throughout the grounds. And we can talk about some of those now. To me, the worst thing, because we've all, those of us who love this, is that the university has engendered a culture of fear and retribution. And it exists, it's palpable, it's tangible. I mean, we've seen it now. I'm telling you, I'm not making this up. I mean, some of you may be very aware, some of you somewhat aware, maybe some of you not aware whatsoever of the healthcare scandal that has plagued the university now openly for the last couple of months. You know, it's the letter written by 128 doctors and other healthcare professionals, which called for the resignation of the CEO of the healthcare system as well as the dean of the medical school. One of the areas they focused in their letter, which included financial improprieties, compromising patient safety, bullying of trainees, but one of the headlines was a culture of fear and retaliation. So it's out in the open from the medical school and the medical healthcare system. But it has enveloped the entire university. A senior faculty member recently told me that this administration, quote unquote, is staggeringly punitive to those who dare to criticize it publicly. Other faculty members over the last couple of years have used me as a platform to express their discontent and fears. In fact, one 2 or 3 years ago wrote a 9-page letter to the Board of Visitors describing in detail this atmosphere of fear to express yourself, both amongst her students and the member herself. Many students similarly have voiced those concerns about being afraid. And I've heard that from students in virtually every school, the college, the education school, the law school. They're afraid to speak out. And even after the adoption of the Statement on Freedom of Expression, of which I was a part of, months later, the university still had DEI mandates, both for hiring and for peer review. It's always going on. To eradicate the wrongdoings here is a full-time job. And just how this got into the public, I don't know, we've got our screen here, and I don't know how many of you were aware of the segment on the Joe Scarborough show. Joe, who's not, can be termed as a typical conservative by any means. This is what he had to say on his show. And if you haven't heard it, it's incredibly revealing.
You know, my daughter at University of Virginia, she's afraid to raise her hand in class because if she says something that's politically incorrect, she will immediately be canceled. She'll be shunned from class. She'll be destroyed in social media by noon. So they just sit in class quiet. Now, if any of you, which camera? Give me a camera to look at. Boom! Oh, look at that one. If any of you out there say, oh, that's just like a conservative, white, Southern guy, da-da-da, that's what you're losing. That's what you're losing. Because That's what I heard. And I didn't hear it from Republicans. I didn't hear it from Trumpers. I heard it from Democrats over the past 3 or 4 years. Their kids were afraid to talk in class and say something unpopular because they would be canceled. And it's an epidemic. Willie will tell you it happens in New York City schools. It happens in colleges. And all of this adds up to people going, come on, this is crazy.
There it is. His daughter, a student at UVA. But the other way that DEI has infected the university community has been this administration has applied double standards over and over again, treating its students differently based on not what they've done, but who they are. I mean, it's actually frightening. I could spend the rest of this whole afternoon going into detail on the incidents, but I'll just raise a few and try to move it quickly. We all remember one of the causing factors of the creation of the Jefferson Council was when that sign showed up on a student's door on the lawn, FUVA, in giant letters, spelt out, not hidden in any way, shape, or form. The university immediately took the position that that was freedom of expression. Wouldn't be taken down because here we are at Thomas Jefferson's University. This was freedom of expression. Of course, they didn't mention that that student was living in university housing and had signed a contract, which in essence said you wouldn't do anything like that. So in essence, it was probably breach of contract, anything other than freedom of expression. But at the very same period of time, there was a medical student by the name of Kiran Bhattacharya, brilliant kid, graduated, I believe, summa cum laude at the age of 16 or 17 at the University of Alabama. He was a troubled student, too. He had some issues. You imagine a 16 or 16-and-a-half-year-old suddenly coming on grounds, being with a lot of them, trying to fit in. But he went to a mandated session on microaggressions, a subject which is certainly fraught with differences of opinion. And at the end of that session, he assiduously questioned the speakers. And that's all it was. He was not disrespectful. He was assiduous. He continued when they were trying to blow him off. He kept on asking the questions. Well, and it's all on tape. I mean, you can, if you Google this, you can find it. You can listen to it. He had a secret sanction placed against his record, which he was unaware of, and then was called to what only one could determine as a Kafkaesque meeting with administration members, where they refused to tell him why he was there. He kept on asking why he was there. They wouldn't tell him why he was there. Well, he wound up suing the university, and in the brief that was submitted by the university took the position that what he did was not protected by the First Amendment. I mean, here we have someone saying FUV on the only academic World Heritage Site in North America, and you had another person assiduously question some faculty members. One they say was protected by the First Amendment, one wasn't. Unfortunately, Mr. Bhattacharya was forced to leave the university. Many contributing factors, I understand, but this was one of the major ones. And he was a kid who had issues. And instead of torturing the kid, what they should have been was helping him. But no, even though he was a ward of this university, they destroyed his life. Another double standard was, some of you may remember the incident a number of years ago where one morning woken up to find the noose around the neck of Homer. Well, without knowing who had done it or why it had been done, the university administration went into battle mode to find out what did it, made public statements on how horrible that was, called in the FBI. Of course, they later found that it had been placed on the neck of this dead white poet by a person who was claiming that that statue represented some form of pedophilia because there was a young boy at the feet of Homer. But the FBI was called in. It was roundly condemned publicly over and over again. Now let's compare that to the masked march in October 2023, sponsored by the Students for Justice in Palestine, where it's pretty clear that there were two violations of the law going on in that march. One is almost without a doubt, which is most of the marchers were masked, and they were masked at the behest of the organizers, specifically to hide their identity. That's felony under Virginia law. Did the university do anything about it? No. Did they say anything about it? No. It was also these marchers were carrying signs which were clearly pro-Hamas and which were calling for, well, they're pretty clearly anti-Semitism. They were calling for the end of Israel as an entity, which by both the State Department and a resolution of Congress, things like that were considered to be anti-Semitic. But no comment about that. So that's also arguably a violation of Virginia statute, which it is against the law and a felony to give support and aid to a terrorist organization, of which Hamas was. So calling the FBI on a noose around the neck of a dead poet, dead 1,000 years, not knowing what the background is, but allow hundreds of students to go out, break the law, and to intimidate Jewish students, and not one word, not a word, by this administration. I can go on and on. I mean, I learn something new every day, and fortunately or unfortunately, I get called all the time. I get people sending me messages, emails, telephone calls about what's going on at the university. So today, I just learned of a fact. You may all be aware of what happened last semester, where a bunch of students living in what was the old Pica house. Pica was tossed off the grounds. That's a whole other issue, the anti-fraternity bent of this administration. But a bunch of students are using it almost like a dorm, an outside house. It's not owned by the university, but it's like 12, 16 students lived in that house. And there was one Jewish student living there, and there was a series of anti-Semitic attacks, verbal attacks against him. And that culminated in one of the other people who had been issuing a lot of those verbal attacks, threatening him with a pistol, with a gun, in his own room. So that student was arrested, and you'd wonder what the university would do about someone doing something like that after 3 of our treasured students were murdered by a gun a few years before. So I just learned today that it was handed over to the Judiciary Committee to make a determination of what to do to this kid. And they gave him community service. And he is going to be back on grounds next semester. Now compare this to what happened to Morgan Bettinger. And I know this has been discussed at least one of our prior conventions. And again, I could spend a half hour on this, but I won't. But needless to say, at worst, what this girl did was make a joke off grounds when she was trying to drive to a truck driver who was blocking people from going down the street because a demonstration was taking place. And she made a joke about it to the truck driver. That joke metastasized into what was allegedly a dangerous, racist comment. The girl was attacked over social media to the extent that she had serious problems, emotional problems, and the university allowed the Judiciary Committee to basically expel her from the grounds for making a joke. Off grounds, a kid who didn't have a father to protect her because her father had been a law enforcement official and died from cancer. I think this is one of the great moments of the Jefferson Council because we helped get her representation, and one of our members of our advisory board who lived in the Charlottesville area acted as almost like a substitute father for her to help her. But the worst part of the story, and this is like almost remarkable, unbelievable, is that the university did start its own in-house investigation from one of its civil rights groups within the university. That investigation came out with a finding that nothing that had been alleged against her had taken place, and she was completely innocent. So this student goes to Jim Ryan and his administration and asks that her record be expunged from what had happened at the Judiciary Committee. And Jim Ryan's answer was pound soil. So she had to institute a lawsuit against the university. And you people have some time, you can read the complaint online. It'll break your heart. It'll bring tears to your eyes that an institution like the University of Virginia could act that way towards one of its own students. I tell you, many of you sitting here, if that was your own daughter, you wouldn't have put up with it for 10 minutes. And trust me, if that had been Robert Hardy's daughter, none of this would have happened. But she sued the university, and between the settlement and the legal costs, probably could have wound up sending more than 100 in-state students to school for free for a year. But this is what we have. This is reality. These are facts. So we've got these double standards, and I'm only hitting on a few, but I'm going to tell you the source of this. So after I served on the Free Expression Committee, when I was still welcome in Jim Ryan's office, which needless to say, I don't think would be the case right now, I was passing through Charlottesville and I asked if I could come and see him. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the fact that these DEI mandates were still in existence months and months after we had issued our freedom of expression statement. And I got into a conversation about so-called marginalized students. And I said, you know, Jim, a lot of these groups you call marginalized or underrepresented are actually running most student organizations these days and are very well represented amongst the deanships, amongst the faculty. I said, but you know, there are other groups of students that are marginalized at Grounds today. And I think the examples I gave were fraternity men, conservative Christians, and I might have given one or two others. And this is his response to me. And I can remember like it yesterday, and I told plenty of people about it at the time, when my recollection was sharp, and it still is sharp. He said, Joel, well, you know, that's the way it's always been. And I was sort of taken aback. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, when you were a student, certain student groups were marginalized, like black students, women, LGBTQ students. They were marginalized. And now it's just a different group that are being marginalized. That was his answer for me. And I sat there at that time looking at the president of the University of Virginia justifying in some manner that students are marginalized on grounds, not doing anything about it. And I knew at that moment that that man should not be sitting behind the desk in Madison Hall. That man should not be president of any university, no less than a public university. But people don't know about that. And this is why it's wonderful to have such a big crowd here. Because when you spend your time and you actually learn the facts and learn what is going on at the university and analyze it, it becomes more and more frightening. But then we have, and I'll sort of end with this, another result, some direct, some less direct, but of the politicization of the grounds. Since John Castine retired in 2010, and I want to give a shout out to John because he was a good friend of mine, we didn't agree on everything. But I knew John for 20 years. I could call him a friend. And while we may disagree on things, there are two things I could say. John always put the interests of UVA first, and he was a good and honest person. Those are things I can't say about the current administration. Since John retired, we've had a series of the worst tragedies and scandals in modern UVA history. One predated Jim's presidency, and that was the Rolling Stone scandal. I'm sure most of you were aware when it happened and what it entailed. But maybe you don't know is how harshly those kids in the Phi Psi house were treated not only by their fellow students, but by faculty members who demonstrated against them and berated them and eviscerated them in classes and on the grounds. Terrible thing. No facts, one allegation made, and their house was vandalized and destroyed. All the kids had to move out, and then they were tortured until a few weeks later when it all came out that it was all a lie. And when it came out that it was all a lie, nobody in that administration apologized to those kids. The one person who wrote something publicly apologizing on behalf of the university was my old friend Ken Elzinga, who also invited the entire pledge class of the Phi Psi house over to his house for a meal. Where was the rest of the administration then? So that was the first one. And I think what happened there is Teresa Sullivan was able to get away with it because of the aborted attempt to get rid of her before, and when that didn't work, she was sort of off bounds for real criticism. But let's go to the shooting deaths of our 3 student athletes. Why didn't the university investigate this? I mean, you can read it, you can read part of what actually went on, because the only report that was finally, after 2 years, made public was so redacted that the mother of one of the students says, "There's nothing there." When asked what she thought of it, she said, "There's nothing there." There isn't anything there. But there's enough that we all know that there was as many red flags flying there as a Marx-Lenin parade in Moscow. It's amazing. And what did they do? Knowing that he had been arrested beforehand for illegal carry of a weapon, that he had told people he had a weapon in his dorm, that he had been investigated for fraternity hazing, but most importantly, that he was being non-cooperative. And again, this involved a gun. It was only a few years before that we had the tragedy at Virginia Tech, shootings on the grounds. So what do? They hand the case over to the Judiciary Committee. I mean, is this, how do you call it? What do you call it? It's certainly misfeasance. It's certainly gross negligence. There's nobody sitting with a rational mind that wouldn't have gone in searched his room. I mean, the university's first thing says, oh, we didn't have the right to search. What do you mean? They do have the right. It's clear that they have the right to search. He's in university housing. They didn't search his room. Misfeasance, malfeasance, or just plain gross negligence? We may never know. I mean, if they don't ever submit, if we're never able to read the full report, you know, that's the shooting deaths. The persecution of our students. I spoke about Morgan Bettinger and Kiran Bhattacharya. You can hear about Matan Goldstein. I believe he's going to be a speaker here later today. We've had the worst outbreak of anti-Semitism in the history of the University of Virginia. And what did, I mean, within 2 days of October 7th, 2023, we had Jewish students writing a letter to the Cavalier Daily saying we're living in fear. And then there are other events. So what do? Do they create an anti-Semitism committee? No. They have a committee on religious inclusion. A few weeks after October 3rd, 80 university professors signed a letter which stated, and this is, again, it boggles the mind, stated that the actions of October 7th had to be viewed in context. Now, we know our former provost becoming president of the University of Pennsylvania, she lost her job. President of Harvard lost her job for saying that student demonstrations had to be viewed in context. These professors were saying that the actual events, the murder of children, the torture, the rape, the burning of people alive, had to be viewed in context. University had nothing to say about it, but that's not the worst. The worst is that 2 of those professors that had signed that were put on this committee for religious inclusion. I mean, it would be no different than having put 2 segregationists on the committee that was studying racial prejudice at the university after the George Floyd comment. How could those 2 people have been put on that committee? It boggles the imagination. And I'll end in this way with the healthcare scandal. And I only have one thing to say about it, because again, you could talk for hours and hours about this. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, when the legal investigation by Williams and Connolly was dropped on the desk of the Board of Visitors, the healthcare system's CEO was forced to resign on that day, which tells you something about what was in that report. But that's not what really matters here. What really matters here is that he was the highest paid employee of the University of Virginia, not including athletic coaches. And as a direct report to President Ryan, from everything that has been made public, or you can see or read the letter, Jim Ryan was aware of most, if not all, of the allegations in that report. So my question to my friends, my question to the Board of Visitors, my question to the university's community is if he was aware of most or all of the facts that caused the CEO of the healthcare system to have to resign, what is he still doing sitting behind the desk in Madison Hall? That's my question. And what I'd like to say is what we need now. We are in an incredible period where the Board of Visitors is in control of the University of Virginia now, and where Jim Ryan has to report to him. And we'll see, by the way, he was supposed to report, I guess, by yesterday what he's done to dismantle DEI at the university. From what we see, he hasn't done very much, because while the university-wide DEI website is down, every single one of the DEI websites of every school at the university is still up as of this weekend. This is what we need to do as a university. We need leadership that will depoliticize the university and focus on education rather than indoctrination. We need leadership that will treat all students equally. We need leadership that will bring meaningful diversity of thought to the faculty and administration. We need leadership that will materially reverse the administrative, bureaucratic bloat that has driven tuition costs to stratospheric heights. We need leadership that will embrace transparency rather than shunning it, and that will not make a mockery of Mr. Jefferson's dictum to follow the truth wherever it may lead. We need leadership that will make decisions based on merit and character, and not on race, religion, ethnicity, or gender. We need leadership that will revitalize the university's treasure, the honor system. And I haven't mentioned the honor system, but I will tell you right now, the honor system at the University of Virginia is dead. The words exist, it's dead. I've spoken to a student just a week ago in the graduate business school who told me that cheating is so bad at Darden that they instituted an investigation, but they turned up so much cheating that they were afraid to publish it because they thought it would be a scandal. I had a senior member of the faculty recently tell me that the honor system is basically dead amongst the faculty. And they're the only ones who bring honor charges. When I was a student, I guess a lot of us here were alums were students, the only people that could bring a charge was a student. Faculty couldn't bring a student. They'd have to have the faculty, the student member, investigate and bring the case themselves. But students stopped years ago bringing honor charges themselves. So it was in the hands of the faculty. And they're now saying that the bureaucratic nonsense is so long and so hard to get through, and then even if they are able to get through the bureaucratic nonsense, most of the kids won't be found guilty anyway. So the honor system is dead. And we need an administration and a board of visitors who take this seriously. The number one mandate for the board of visitors, when you read their rules and regulations on what they're supposed to be doing, is the protection of the honor. It's the protection of the traditions of the university, foremost of which it says is the honor system. In sum, what we need is new leadership at the university to restore honesty, integrity, and truth to the grounds. Thank you very much.